I have to say, of all the countries I lived in the Middle East, Syrians very seldomly, if ever, ask me about my faith.
This is Faith Complex, a dialogue about the entanglement of religion, politics and art.
Hello, my name is Jacques Berlinois of Georgetown University, and you're watching Faith Complex. Joining us today is Mr. Andrew Tabler. He is Next Generation Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near Eastern Policy right here in Washington, D.C. He's also author of the forthcoming book, In the Lion's Den, America's Cold War with Assad's Syria. Mr. Tabler, welcome to Faith Complex.
Thanks very much.
We've seen Islamist movements really just explode in Yemen, in Egypt, in Lebanon, in Gaza. Tell us about Islamist movements in present-day Syria, and then we'll look back a little bit at the history.
Sure. It's a little bit hard to get to the bottom of it because the regime keeps very tight control over its crackdowns on these organizations. Syria is run by a minority, it's a minority-dominated regime. They're called Alawites, and Alawites are an offshoot of Shia Islam, and they are extremely secular. And they will oftentimes round up different militants. Now, one of the big problems for the Syrian government is that over the last few years, when they allowed the jihadis into the country to go and fight in Iraq, they were transiting in and out of Syria, and then when they can no longer go back into Iraq because of coalition efforts there, they're backed up inside of Syria. Some went to Lebanon. Some trying to escape the country, but it causes a problem because Syria is a majority Sunni country, and once you have those kind of networks flowing through your country, it's very hard to rein them in. When
you say the Alawis, the minority sect that rules Syria, are secular, please tell us what you mean by that.
Syria being a majority Sunni country, the minorities in the country, which represent about 25% of the population in total, Alawites, Druze, Christians, and some 12 are Shia, and a few other Circassians and so on. They have a big problem and felt under the sort of yoke of Sunni Islam for a very long period of time under Ottoman rule. Since the end of Ottoman rule, they very much want a secular space in society, and the Alawites certainly wanted that. They went into the military under the French mandate, and they used the secular ideology, Baathism, to place a secular space in public life in Syria.
So they wanted a secular space in the sense that they were tired of being subject to Sharia law, for example?
Correct. Alawites are probably one of the most secular groups in the Middle East, if not the Levant, and oftentimes many Alawites don't even pay attention to their religion or really follow their religion, which was very interesting visiting those areas when I was in Syria, because in a lot of ways we had a tremendous amount they had a tremendous amount in common with Americans. They never pried into your private life. They didn't really care about it. The other thing about Syria, I have to say, of all the countries I lived in the Middle East, I think perhaps Syria and Lebanon, Syrians very seldomly, if ever, ask me about my faith. They just, which is a big, if you go to Cairo or the Gulf or Jordan or a lot of places in the Middle East where I worked over the years, you get in a taxi, first question is, you speak Arabic, why haven't you converted to Islam?
Right.
You never got those questions in Syria.
Yeah, and you don't want to tell them you're an atheist, I assure you.
That's right.
Yeah. So in Syria, there's just not a kind of public concern or obsession with one's level of religiosity. So it's kind of a positive. In a way, it's a positive aspect of Syrian secularism. It is.
Now, over the last few years, under the Bush administration, when the pressures were really bearing down on the regime, this would be in 2006, the regime reached out to Sunni Islamic institutions in Syria. For example, the Grand Mufti of the Republic died in 2005. And the office was vacant for about 17 months. And he was actually appointed by presidential decree for the first time. Usually he was selected from among the clerics. President Assad began appearing in public praying with the Mufti. So they began to reach out to Islam in very powerful ways, which was ironic in that that same regime under his father had a war with the Muslim Brotherhood in 1982, and an estimated 20,000 people.
Can we talk about Hama a little bit? There's such a paucity of accurate information. What did you learn in Syria about Hama that maybe in the West we couldn't have known because we weren't there? Is there anything fresh and new that we're learning about the Hama incident? First of all, how many do we think were killed in all?
It depends. Some people say 10,000, some people say 30,000. It varies. I think it tells you a lot that we don't know. A lot of people also were just disappeared in that they went into the prison system in Syria and died under torture.
And these were members of the Muslim Brotherhood, if I'm correct?
They were, or they sometimes were not members of the Muslim Brotherhood. They were just, they could just be religious people. That fear, these unresolved issues, and the fear that resulted from those series of events, was something that in the early days when I was in Syria, if you said Bashar al-Assad's name in public, people would look over their shoulder. Now they don't do that anymore, but the fear is still there. Syria's come a long way since that time, but it's telling that the regime still hasn't worked out or still hasn't reconciled with that aspect, that part of its population concerning those violent events.
So Assad Sr. had very little tolerance for political Islam, and what you're seeing is Assad Jr. is in a very Machiavellian, strategic manner reaching out a little bit more than his father?
That's right. That's right. And he has consistently done that. Now, just how far that will go, I think there are limits to that. It's very hard to, it's very hard to know. It also, I think it has changed. For example, over the last year, there has been some sort of reconciliation, limited reconciliation between the regime and the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, whether that will continue, I don't know, but because they seem like irreconcilable parties. But
here's a quote from one of your publications. "The Arab world is badly ruled. Its rulers are not accountable to their people, and they often make bad decisions." Short of democratization, what is going to be the driver of progress in the Arab world? Maybe we could start with Syria. What's going to shake that situation up?
Sure. Well, the first step is promoting rule of law in those countries. Now, how you do that doesn't have to be by the barrel of a gun. But it's, in Syria, the legal system simply just did not function. In fact, all the years I lived there or did business there, it just did not function. It was only, the whole system had been corrupted by power. So a good way to start is to promote rule of law in those countries. And I know there are a lot of skeptics out there that say, well, you can't do this as long as you have a dictatorship in power. Well, you're going to have to try. You're going to have to try and do something because, look, these countries are desperate for goodies from the outside, foreign direct investment specifically. They're one of the fastest growing populations in the Middle East. So they're desperate for investment. They need it from outside. You can start promoting rule of law that way and go down towards human rights and other areas and start from there and see how they react.
Now, would you say there is religious freedom in current day Syria?
Yes, there is. There is more religious freedom than a lot of other countries. I would say it's on par with Lebanon. In fact, when I was in Syria and I did a number of articles on Shiitization, conversions from Sunni to Shia Islam, I found that the reason why these conversions could happen is that the state protected people when they actually indeed converted, and they allowed for books to be disseminated on arguing for conversions, or there was no way for the state to crack down on these types of publications or programming, and people felt very free in this area, and they began to, in a limited way, convert to Shia Islam, which was interesting.
Now, would you attribute this to the Alawi, somewhat relaxed sense of the role that religion should play in the public sphere?
Yeah, a good Syrian friend once told me, every system has its advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages of the Syrian system is that they allow for more religious freedoms. In fact, more religious freedoms than many of our allies in the Arab world.
Andrew Tabler, we want to thank you so much for sharing all your experiences in Syria, the years you spent there, and telling us about a part of the world which I think, quite frankly, very few of us actually understand. Thank you.
Thanks very much.